Due Process, awarded the 2005 New York Emmy for Societal Concerns Programming.
I just think that it's really strange that they think that they could do this to me or to any girl that wants to play.
She said she played as well as the boys, but she wasn't allowed to join their team. Last season, she could play with the girls or sit out. Now she's getting ready for a new hoop season with the boys, but only after intervention by the state Civil Rights Division. Gender equality in sports, up next on this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, a private foundation focusing on New Jersey public policy issues. Additional funding provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual and online legal reference, elaw.com.
It's been 33 years since a 12-year-old Hoboken girl who wanted to play Little League launched a gender revolution in children's sports, and 33 years since a federal law demanded the schools provide equal opportunities in sports. I'm Raymond Brown, and on the docket for this edition of Due Process, gender equality in sports. Just how far have we come? And is it all for the better? We'll get some very different answers here in the studio, but first, Sandy King's in Newark with a case that launched this latest look at girls and their rights on the playing field.
Raymond, this case started in much the same way as that Little League case back in '72, with one little girl who wanted in on a boys' team, not because she was looking to mount a protest or make a point, but only because she had the sports skills and saw a boys' team as a reasonable place to use them. In this latest case, though, it wasn't a baseball diamond, but a basketball hoop that had such a strong appeal.
They're playing basketball.
There's men's basketball, and there's women's. And rarely do the two meet. In fact, even when it's boys and girls, they are rarely playing on the same court at the same time.
I was told by one of the trustees, well, she can't play. She's not registered. She's not a boy. This is the boys' league. She's got to play with the girls.
Still, the law says that's not how it has to be. In fact, under New Jersey's civil rights statute, girls have a right to play where they please, even if that's with the boys.
Haven't we gotten to the point where we don't have these strictly defined gender roles? I mean, haven't we moved beyond that point now in 2005?
So when Caitlin Alvaro signed up to play on the boys' Biddy basketball team in Ridgewood, she thought she'd be welcomed.
I'm just someone who just wants to play basketball.
After all, she already played on a boys' baseball team, a boys' soccer team. She even went to football camp. And her parents had told her that gender should never be an obstacle.
You know, society has this message that they're trying to say that women should be treated equal. But yet, here we are in the year 2005 sending a signal to 10, 11, 12-year-olds that they're not equal. But yet, when they get to be adults, all of a sudden they're expected to think that they're equal.
But the Biddy Basketball League had another point of view. Its message to Caitlin: go play with the girls.
I just think that it's really strange that they think that they could do this to me or to any girl that wants to play.
So her parents took their case to the school superintendent. After all, the league practiced and played in the Ridgewood public schools. And school teams didn't discriminate on gender.
It's real easy for the superintendent and the board to say, either you play here and you let everyone play, or you go find other facilities. They weren't willing to do that. And I don't know why they weren't willing to do that, because they held all the cards.
But the school board didn't intervene, so the Alvaros turned to New Jersey's law against discrimination.
We have a law in New Jersey that protects girls in this situation, and if girls try to apply to be on a basketball league or in Little League or in some other sort of recreation sport and they're told, no, you got to play with the girls only, you can come to us and we'll take a look and see whether that's discriminatory.
By the start of this year, the Civil Rights Division had found probable cause of a bias violation, but Caitlin Still was barred from the team and spent the season sitting out.
That they could say, oh no, she can't, she's a girl, she can't do this. I think that's really strange, living in this world where everybody's trying to fight that.
But as we were working on this story, conciliation talks finally began in earnest. And on the day we showed up for an interview with the state civil rights chief, he was signing an agreement with Biddy Basketball, providing that Caitlin or any other girl would have open and equal opportunity to play on the team of her choice.
This is a unique circumstance involving really a review of a case that occurred maybe 25 years ago involving at that time, a young girl in Hoboken that was trying to get on the Little League team. And this case went all the way up the court system in New Jersey, and it really made a change nationwide with Little League. And for the first time, because of what this girl did very powerfully, girls are now allowed to play on Little League.
And on Ridgewood, Biddy Basketball.
You know, Caitlin said something very interesting. She said, you know, I don't want to play for fun. Playing for fun is for babies. I want to play to win. So when it's not possible for her to be good enough to help her team win because of her gender, that's when she will stop.
They're playing basketball without that basketball. They're playing
So Caitlin Alvaro's on the team, courtesy of the state civil rights law and its public accommodations clause. But similar suits continue to surface in other parts of the country based on state and federal laws. And it's not just about whether girls can play with boys. In 1972, there were fewer than 32,000 women playing college sports. They didn't get athletic scholarships, and the sports they played got virtually no money. It's a very different picture today thanks to Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, a rule that continues to raise controversy more than 30 years later.
And when we come back, we'll be talking about girls and sports and law. Some very different views, especially on those co-ed teams, so stay with us.
We need to get away from these strictly constructed gender roles, because what it does is it emphasizes, or at least it attempts to communicate to young girls, that somehow they are lesser people. They're lesser humans, they're lesser Americans, they're lesser New Jerseyans than boys. And that begins to carry forward into the academic life, into social life, and then you have girls thinking, lowering their expectations, not thinking they can achieve the things that boys can achieve because they're girls, and that's ridiculous. And so every time we find this kind of gender inequality, we're going to deal with it, and we're going to try to deal with it informally, and if people don't get the message through our letter writing and informal negotiations, then we're going to sue, and we're not going to go away because this foolishness has to end.
So why shouldn't girls play on boys' teams? And what about boys joining girls' teams? Reverend John Rice, a former athlete and current kids coach, knows that he opposes mixed-gender teams. But we'll see what a female Olympic athlete thinks when we hear from Joetta Clark-Diggs, now a motivational speaker, as well as president of Joetta Sports and Beyond. And with us from Newark, we'll ask Professor Judy Weiss, a feminist activist who helped bring that first Little League case, how she sees the current state of girls and sports. Welcome to all of you. Let me start with you, John. A fabled athlete, somebody who is renowned and even revered as a coach. What's your view about whether girls should play on boys' teams?
Well, I just feel that boys are physically stronger, and there has to be so many concessions for girls when they play with boys. They're not as fast, they're not as strong, they're just not big and tough enough. For instance, in football, I mean, I can't see a girl getting hit by a boy. She might have the speed.
Let me ask you, let's start with non-contact sports, then we'll look at contact sports a little separately. In girls' contact sports, assuming there's not an injury risk, why not just let a girl who can compete?
Compete in contact sports?
No, in non-contact sports, baseball, basketball, where it's contact but not collision, to use Vince Lombardi's language.
Well, even baseball, where I've coached baseball, the speed of the ball and the reaction time, I'm saying girls just don't react as fast. If a curveball came high into their head, they would react slower.
Right. Well, this is a pitch down the middle of home plate for Judy Weiss, who has, I think, a different view, given her history. Judy?
Those were some of the same arguments that were made 30-some years ago by the Little League in arguing in court against Maria Pepe and girls in general playing on Little League. And the arguments about girls being slower were thoroughly debunked by medical people. There are other arguments about girls' bones being weaker and girls being more likely to be injured were also thoroughly debunked. I would go along with the idea that probably there are more girls that are not going to be able to compete with the boys, but there are some girls who clearly can, and there's no reason that they shouldn't be allowed to.
John, I guess let me follow up on what Judy said. Would you favor basically a rule that says even in non-contact sports, girls should just flat out not compete on boys' teams with boys?
Yes, I think that they shouldn't compete against boys, and if they're that good of an athlete, they would be superstars with the girls.
Joetta, you have some pretty impressive credentials, a 4-time Olympian, 9 U.S. championships, and you dominated 800 meters for, seemed like 20 or 30 years. What's your view?
Well, on this issue, I happen to think that girls and boys at certain ages can compete and together. And we're talking about non-contact sports, so we're talking about softball, soccer skills. If they have the skills,
what's the cutoff age that you see?
I would probably say when you get to 13, 14, when the guys are getting older and stronger and bigger. Going back to the issue of non-contact sports, I think if the girl has the skill sets that will allow them to compete with the guys, that would be okay to compete. But in non-contact sports, so if you're doing a soccer or maybe lacrosse or maybe a tennis at a younger age, track and field, put everyone together, that's okay. But there comes a point in time where the physical size and strength level changes.
Let me ask you this. Would you have a bright line rule, or would you allow parents and coaches to make a case-by-case assessment? If there is a girl who can compete in community college or even NCAA, why not allow it if, in fact, there's a judgment by the professionals and parents that she can compete?
Well, I think the opportunity should be there. However, I think that it may have a broad line saying, you know, any girl could try out. That could be okay, but not all girls are going to be able to do that. And you shouldn't make concessions on the tryout period.
Let me throw out another fact about the story we watched at the beginning of the show. It turns out that young lady could have competed on some girls' teams. In fact, she did, but some of them had a basket that was lower as opposed to the regulation height, which meant over time she was at a disadvantage in terms of developing skills. Does it make a difference, John, if a girl is disadvantaged because her inability to play on boys' teams means she may play with different rules that ultimately stunt her development?
Well, I know in grammar school, the girls do play with a smaller ball. I've never heard of them playing with a lower rim, but they do play with a smaller ball, and I think that's fine for them to compete there. I think as they get older and their hands get bigger and they get stronger, they can use the regular size basketball.
So the question is, if, for example, as in Ridgewood Biddy basketball, a girl is forced to compete really at a lower level of skill because there are separate rules for girls in girls' sports, why shouldn't she be allowed, if she can compete, play with the boys, regulation height, regulation size ball, whatever those differences are?
I haven't seen that.
Okay.
I mean, I just haven't seen it. And I go back to this point. If she develops as a girl, she'd do better playing with girls and being very good, maybe getting a scholarship later on.
All right, let me come back to Judy. I know Joetta talked about age being a cutoff point, or at least a point at which maybe the rules might change. You've been dealing with this issues for 3 decades. What do you think, Judy?
Well, I think that there's a time, perhaps in the upper grades of elementary school or in middle school, when a lot of the girls are bigger than a lot of the boys, where the girls undergo a growth spurt before the boys, and why they should be having a smaller ball and a lower hoop makes no sense whatsoever.
In fact, is there enough of a physiological difference between girls and boys that the legal ideas we have, which suggest a drive for equality as much as possible, clash with physical reality? Or ought it always be on a case-by-case basis? Any woman or girl who can compete anywhere where with men in non-contact sports should be allowed to?
I mean, if you look at this, the data, you have basically 2 curves of size, where the girls, the mean for the girls is somewhat lower than the mean for the boys, let's say adults, women and men. But there are people at the extreme. There are many men that are smaller than many women, because you've got a curve. You haven't got all men being 5'10" and all women being 5'3". You've got a range for both sexes and a considerable amount of overlap. So there are, in point of fact, a fair amount of women who are larger than a fair amount of men.
Let me give John Rice a tough question. You're coaching a college men's tennis team, and Serena Williams shows up. Can she play for you on your men's college tennis team?
Well, Serena Williams can play anywhere she wants to
Okay,
play.
but I'm taking the extreme example to see whether this is a principled objection outside of physiology, or whether there are women who can compete essentially with their male peers and ought to be allowed to, no matter what level.
But Raymond, it's good that you asked that question, because I found that even on a college level, even the best women player are still not as strong as the men. The men in college are serving at 115 miles an hour. They're serving at 140 miles an hour.
Would you give her a tryout? Would you say if you can hit with these guys, you can play for me?
Boys 16, 17, 18 years old are making Wimbledon. They're winning Forest Hills.
I know, but I don't think you've answered my question. It's not like you deduct, but let me ask the same question to Joetta. You're coaching a men's college tennis team. Serena shows up. What are you going to say? She got a tryout and she can make it, she can play? Or are you going to, or would there be some other kinds of rules you would impose for some other reason?
No, my basic premise is that, you know, again, at different ages, different things happen. However, you do have exceptions. You have some women who are just exceptional in their area, and you have some women who can compete with men or in certain men's sports. But if she showed up and she has the qualities that we need and the skill sets that we need to play on my varsity men's team, of course she would be able to do that. However, I think being an athlete for most of my life, I think women, we tend to want to excel in our area. So instead of her playing with the men, she's excelling with the women and setting new grounds and setting the bar higher for women. Myself, instead of running with the men, with the boys, as a youngster, I ran with the women, trying to let them know that women can run distance and we could do a good job at doing that and setting a higher standard in that area. So I think it's important for us to think about not competing with the men, but doing what's right with the skill sets that you've been given.
Judy, the reason we're having this conversation, or able to have it, is Title IX, which has made a significant difference over time. But there are current controversies that have evolved in Title IX, including the question of whether or not schools are able to avoid really expending equal resources for men and women's sports. Is there a new rule concerning clarification, or new clarification in Title IX from the Department of Education that may have a profound impact?
Yes, a recent rule out of the Department of Education said that schools can survey the women students to see if the students feel that they're being well served by the current athletic program, which in most schools, most colleges and universities is still far from equal. It's certainly a whole lot better than it was before Title IX, but it's still far from equal. They're saying an email survey, and if students don't respond to the email survey, that they'll assume the students are satisfied. Now, anybody who's had experience with email knows that there's an awful lot of people out there who don't pay attention to email, who ignore messages, who just get so much spam that they just delete a whole lot of stuff and may delete important messages as well. So I think it's absurd for schools, to depend on an email survey.
Let me look at that even a little differently, Joetta. I know, John, you want to get in. Just let me ask Joetta a question. Let me get even beyond the email question. Do you think that high school girls going to college all have the requisite knowledge about what might be good for them or what they might be exposed to and which to explore, that we ought to rely heavily on what they say is an indicator of interest and then of resources that ought to be devoted to women's sports?
Well, you know, they are young, but they do have viewpoints. I think we should get them involved and listen to what they have to say, but again, using email may not be the way to do that, to get that information and get an accurate account of what they're thinking.
Now, Judy, does this come about because of the pressure to spend on women's sports that comes from large expenditures, especially at major schools, on men's football and basketball?
Well, certainly schools spend far more on men's sports than women's sports. And if all they need to do is survey women by email, see if they're satisfied, they won't have to spend much because they won't get many responses, and they'll assume, and probably erroneously, that all the women are happy with the situation.
And the federal government has put pressure, John, on schools to equalize expenditures, which has meant that some men's minor sports have disappeared or at least been underfunded. What's your view about that in this equation of trying to find equal treatment for men and women in sports?
Well, I know in colleges they are concerned about return on investment, for instance. And I know with the men's sports, if they put the money into sports, a lot of times they get it back and it's used as almost marketing to get students to the school. I don't find that true with the women's sports.
But fencing and track and field and other sports that are not real money generators tend to disappear when you require that equal spending be done for men and women. And one controversy has been that minor men's sports disappear, cutting down on opportunities for men. Is that a reality that concerns you? Or Joetta, did you want to say something?
Well, yes, it concerns me in that, you know, I got out of high school, the top high school recruit in the country, male or female. And when I went to college at the University of Tennessee, where I graduated, there was the AIAWs. We weren't even the NCAA. Even though was awarded a full scholarship at the time, a full scholarship didn't include books and didn't include visits to the college. So my freshman year, I had to pay for my own books and get to colleges. I say that because we also had to get rid of the men's wrestling team in order, when we went to NCAA rules my sophomore year.
What do you think about that as a consequence? Does that trouble you?
I think it does trouble me. I don't think that you should get rid of one sport in order to have the other one. I think that there's a way to create a balance, and I think that it would be a healthier balance doing it that way as opposed to taking away
What's
one.
the way? What's the way?
One way would be to the revenue that's being generated from football and basketball, to have that brought down and given to the programs. Another way is to think about how you can restructure the program. My school was men and women programs were separate. A lot of colleges have combined programs. You might look into separating the men's and women programs and see how they stand on their own merit.
We're down to a final 10 seconds each. Judy, how far have we progressed towards equality in sports for women and men?
I think we've come a long way since the 70s, Title IX. I mean, we wouldn't see the women Olympians that we've seen lately. We wouldn't see girls basketball at University of Connecticut so big, all these kinds of things.
Joetta,
we've come a long way, but we have a long way still to go.
How far have we come?
We've come a far way, but I think that we still need to go further regarding advertising and also regarding the money that we receive professionally.
The opportunities long term. John, where are we in the continuum of equality for both genders in sports?
Well, I think that the two can be separate and still be equal.
But do you think that we're closer to equality, or are we there?
No, I think men's sports are definitely probably where colleges would invest their money and get their return.
Is that good or bad?
I think that's just the way it is.
Just the way it is. Well,
just the
I
way
think
it
we'd have some dispute on that. Maybe we'll come back and revisit this. My thanks anyway to John Rice, to Joetta Clark-Diggs, and to Judy Weiss. That's it for this edition of Due Process, but we'll be back next week with yet another cutting-edge issue of law and justice. Till then, for Sandy King and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
Girls should be able to play in any kind of team or league. I think girls have become more interested in sports now that they've been more encouraged more.
I mean, if they're not being challenged in their own league, why not be in a situation where they could be more challenged?
I think after a certain age, though, I think that there's, a lot of other questions that come into to being about size, weight, strength, what particular type of sports they're playing.
Question comes in football, there's a lot of contact, that might not be appropriate.
Girls must be girls and boys must be boys.
If they prove they're good enough to be on a team, then they should, and sex shouldn't matter.
I was the only girl on an all-boys ice hockey team in high school. Worked out great.
But realistically, is it viable to our health? That's what we have to think about.
At first they tried to, throw me in a garbage can, but I dumped the garbage can on their head, so, they left me alone after that.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, a private foundation focusing on New Jersey public policy issues. Additional funding provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual and online legal reference, elaw.com.